Kia ora and welcome back to TechWeekTV 2023. And I'm sitting here today excited to be here with Alison Mackie, who is the Executive Director of EdTech New Zealand, amongst many other things. I should have to get my piece of paper out for this one. She's Executive Director NZ Tech Alliance, which includes the industry groups of Blockchain New Zealand, EdTech New Zealand IoT Alliance and Location Tech. It's a lot on your plate, Alison, but of course today we are here to talk specifically about EdTech, my favourite topic. Naturally, someone who has spent actually the last quarter of a century, don't say it out loud, in education and technology. This is a topic very close to my heart. And certainly I think in terms of sectors, the EdTech industry in Aotearoa really does punch pretty big. And we've got some stellar examples of global companies who have started here and have gone offshore and done some really amazing things. And just a year ago, I remember waking up to the news around Education Perfect selling for $400 million and going, wow, that should just be the biggest news of the day. And it barely got a headline and just made me realise that still education is a mystery when it comes to economics and a mystery when it comes to tech. So great to have you here, because I think between the two of us, we have an idea we'd like to stir the pot.
A little bit, yes.
And really this idea that education is changing and EdTech products and services, such as Education Perfect, you know, it's a great example of taking advantage of online learning and democratizing it completely.
Yes.
You know, you see a lot of these companies. You know, which ones stand out to you? Have you particular Kiwi companies that you'd kind of love and follow?
Yes, I think education and EdTech products and services, you know, they start from, you know, early childhood education with interactive tools with iPads. We've seen that across the board. We've seen the iPad generation coming up. And then, you know, you've got things like StyleFit that utilizes AI technology to help school children from, you know, primary school all the way up to intermediate to learn how to write through AI. So it can automatically adjust a child's writing to create better sentence structures. And then you go up to things like in high school where there's a use case called Co-Driver, and it helps children in smaller towns, help them utilizing VR to learn how to drive and have that interactive experience of their own roads with, you know, false hazards, so that they learn how to drive even if they don't have access to an instructor. And then you move on to your area of expertise, which is micro-credentials and heading into that other academic space as well.
Yeah, well, actually,
which is great.
Interesting enough with Academy X, actually the bigger part of our organisation is actually EdTech, which is we have a learning management system which we license and as a SaaS product to businesses and organisations across the world, you know, government and corporate. So even as a traditional education player, we still play very heavily in EdTech, and I think it is part of this diversification of education that we're now thinking about where do our students want to learn and how do they want to learn. And we've seen some big challenges, particularly in our compulsory sector.
Yes.
You know, I think the biggest one that as parents we've heard a lot about is absenteeism.
Yes.
And what does school mean in an era where what is out in the big wide world in terms of careers doesn't necessarily reflect what happens in our high schools? And have you got thoughts about that?
Well, I think in terms of absentees, I think that there has been such a disruption with the school system over the years. I think in Christchurch as well, where I traditionally learned how to teach and taught, I noticed the behavioural differences in students as well because of that disaster of the earthquakes. And now we've had children who had to switch overnight to online learning because of our lockdowns and COVID. And so I think there's kind of been this mismatch of that traditional behaviour that I went through, with you went through with schooling, of that structure, and this is how it is, this is how it's going to be. And I think that people are starting to wake up a little bit, that maybe that traditional structure, that neoliberal traditional system isn't quite right for this modern world.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting when we think about the careers that young people will enter. And in the last few weeks, it's certainly the conversation about ChatGPT in the education system. You know, how do people think about it? What does it mean for assessment? What does it mean for learning? You know, this is another significant sort of tipping point in education.
Yes.
Because the very nature of what we initially set out to do within education has been challenged by some of the tools which are saying, actually, there are faster, better ways of doing this. And the argument I will always present around technologies such as generative AI is if you give young people a better tool, of course they're going to want to use it.
Of course.
They're not going to say, well, I'll put that on the side because the school hasn't quite figured it out yet. And in the same way that we've seen in every iteration of every type of new technology,
Yes.
young people are the very first to say, how can we use this?
Yes. Yeah.
And how do we adopt it in the way we think and learn and our own productivity? And so
Yes.
and I can't push it back.
I think that was one of our previous conversations as well about the calculator and how that absolutely disrupted our maths teachers because they thought, no, you need to know how to do long form math. You need to be able to understand that. But is that productive? No. And you then move into the workplace and you need to be efficient, time is money, but you also want things to be correct the first time. So now we're in that stage again, generative AI. I don't think we should fear it in a classroom setting, and students will cheat if they're prone to that, but they also want an easy way to get to the answers.
I'm not sure I ever see it as cheating at all. I just think it's the information exists out there. It's generative. It's coming from a source of information. It's not bringing it. The information as a general rule is sound, and it's a great starting point for research. So it's just shortening the process.
Yes.
I think that the examples that I'm hearing where people are being accused of cheating is in most cases have been rebutted and saying, no, we didn't cheat. It wasn't that, and there's no way of really knowing that. So I think even this idea that we can stop it at the curb and say, look, let's not do this, let's can somehow contain it. I read today in the last month there's 1,000 new AI companies have come out in the education space.
I know.
Who have immersed their, whether it be a sort of a chat-like function within a back-end system or a standalone. There are so many pilots right now. We've got obviously all the big tech companies coming out with their kind of version of ChatGPT. So it's certainly not a case of stopping it. It's just going to get bigger. And
we cannot stop it. It's the cat's out of the bag. But I think talking about that conversation in the classroom setting and talking about like moving away from the traditional system, I'm very biased because I have an arts degree. I taught classics and social studies. It all has to come back to critical thinking skills. And I think that's where we need to move forward with our education. Let's not teach our students to just be a cog in the wheel, to then be assessment driven, to then go into the workplace. Let's make them real thinkers so that they can think outside of the box, become entrepreneurs, think about the next cool thing or think differently, bring diversity to our world. Yeah,
and when you think about digital, it's in every industry now.
Yes.
And of course, the more specialist your knowledge is around technology, the more opportunities you have. Doesn't matter if you're in health education, and you could be in personal training, a chef. It really doesn't matter. It comes down to the more specific you know around these new technologies, the more value you are for an organisation who's trying to adopt and adapt. And so my view is education, particularly at the senior schools and then into tertiary, over the next 10 years will completely morph.
Yes.
Because portfolio careers, working for different employers, working globally but being in the location you choose to live, having the ability to work on projects, all of those things will require short, sharp learning bursts.
Yes, yeah.
And so if education is accessible to all almost anywhere, anytime, the idea of going to one particular place to learn over a period of time becomes a little redundant.
Yes.
And just yesterday we had Masa McConnell here from AUT, who's a specialist in AI, and she was saying her PhD she completed not that long ago in machine learning is now redundant.
I know.
And so you can spend years and years perfecting an expertise, and within the tech sector it's going to change.
Yes.
And so here within Aotearoa we're really focusing on the rise of micro-credentials, getting people saying you don't need to go into a full degree, do these bite-sized learning to really accentuate your skill set, to determine your particular flavour of maybe a technology or a focus around things like sustainability. So, do you imagine the same thing, that people will go back and say, does that 1 3-year or 4-year degree make sense in a world that literally is shifting?
Well, I think even my education journey is the way that I think I'm in that transition use case of education. I studied arts. I studied painting, photography, classics at high school because I didn't know that technology was for somebody like me. That's more of a critical thinker, a strategist. And then I did my BA in arts. I did my master's in education. And then I decided I don't want to be in education. that's not for me anymore. I still love it. But then I started doing micro-credentials, and I took a course through Berkeley on blockchain technology back in 2018, and that catapulted my career in technology. That one
That's a great
small,
example.
short course at the right time as well to really become a leader in the blockchain industry changed my life. And then from there, I did another micro-credential, another one, and I'm still doing them.
Yeah. And I think it's about augmentation, or the augmentation of your background. So you can be a fine artist, but if you understand fine artist and tech.
And technology, yes.
Then, right now we're hearing all this conversation around, we have so many different types of artistic pursuits have been really challenged by AI.
Yes.
We're seeing, Drake songs come out that's not from Drake. We're seeing art coming out not from the original artist and mimicking. We're seeing those who are embracing it, and some people saying, I want you to use my art or my scripts or my style to produce AI versions. Some are pushing back and challenging legally. But actually, if you understand these sort of different worlds, and you can augment your career like you did with a short blockchain course, took you on a different direction, then I think that's how we're going to see education. There were people saying, yes, literacy, numeracy, digital fluency, all these things we definitely need, communicate, soft skills, all are given.
Across the board,
But what's the flavour you want to add to it? The extra layer.
That extra layer, what brings that joy to your life? That little spark of interest that you will hold forever. That be the foundation, and then adding in those micro-credentials and understanding, okay, this is how I can apply it in a real use case for my career. And you don't have to stick to the same career for the rest of your life. And that's why being a lifelong learner is key, and that's why education is so fantastic. It's no longer just, do you do science? Do you do arts? Are you going to be a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer? That's not the case anymore.
Yeah, and so I think it's really now challenging employers, but also people who are making decisions about when is the last time they went back and learnt to augment their career. Like actually, how do they know the benefits of, say, blockchain, VR, AR, AI, IoT, let's throw all the acronyms out there. How do they know what they can do if they haven't learnt? And so how do we get those people making sure that lifelong learning really is part of their plan of professional development, but also the people that work for them?
Yes, I think and that's something I'm really passionate about as well. I'm actually on the Young Directors Committee with the Institute of Directors.
Right.
And so part of my role with that is to help go into boardrooms, talk to CEOs and the high-level directors to understand what emerging technology is coming out and where they can help upskill their workers who are keen to do it, but they don't have that opportunity within their own workspace. So it's about changing that conversation, and I think that higher level is so critical. It's government and it's the CEOs and board directors. We need to change their mind.
It's interesting though you say that, because you're going in and you're saying they don't know how to do it. And this is the challenge I think we have with education. Because if you happen to live rurally, or you're a small town and you're in the region and you don't have access to the subject that you want to study or the area of expertise you want to focus, it makes sense to supplement it with access to online learning.
Yes.
And then if you do that in one area, then you might say, well, actually, I'm also interested in another particular aspect, but I want the world's best teacher.
Yes.
Or I want the deepest expert. Or I want that young person who's deeply involved with that to be the one who's guiding me. And this is where I think education as a whole is really going to fragment, that we'll start to almost pick and mix.
Yes.
We'll choose the things that we want to do at our local school with the things that, particularly around socialisation and some of those real basic building blocks of education, but then we're going to supplement it.
Yes.
And we'll say, we might do it with Berkeley or online with Harvard, but we might equally do it with a startup or an NGO or someone who's just, who's a real deep expert who's done research in it, who's not an institute at all, but an individual who knows a lot about something, and we'll say, I want to learn from them.
Yeah.
And this, I think, we have to look at as educators and saying, this model of education is changing.
Yes.
And what it means to be, officially learned or knowledgeable is going to shift, because in the end the context keeps changing. The influences and the inputs because of technology keep coming in and changing. And so we're going to be questioned about how long ago did you learn that?
Yes.
Because if it's a few years out of date, it doesn't really mean an awful lot.
And that's the same even with blockchain. What I learnt back in 2018 is completely different to what it is now. And I still have to keep up to date.
Do you think it's part of the reason that people get challenged by technology, that it is constantly evolving and a little intimidating, that you do have to keep learning? You can never take your foot off the accelerator?
Well, even with AI, that's changed so much in the past 2 weeks. So how can we predict from 6 months from now? And I know that Elon Musk said that he wants to put a pause on AI for the next 6 months, but I think that's controversial and a mistake. That's a whole
other...
other...
The letter hasn't gone anywhere, so it wasn't just Elon, it was a whole bunch of
that's
people.
True,
and
yes.
actually, the moratorium didn't happen.
Yeah.
And in fact, since then, of course, we've had, Bard come out and we've got the co-pilot.
I know.
Being, actually the acceleration has happened.
Yeah.
Where there is money to be found and money to be made, I think there's no chance of pausing, the kind of the uptake of generative AI.
Yeah.
And that will include, of course, in education.
Yes.
There will be so many education tools coming out that actually adopt it.
And I think that's the thing, and this is where you and I align in our controversy, is that we need to make the Ministry of Education and our government officials really aware of what's happening, and they need to start rethinking the digital curriculum. And I know that the digital strategy refresh is ready to come out, but I don't know if it's really thought ahead 20 years from now, and understanding that potential of, I want to learn from this expert who lives in London, for example. How can I have them in my little world and do that through Zoom or be part of a course that's open access? So how do we fund that as well? Yeah. Where does that money come from? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, as soon as we start to understand this personalisation that's going to happen in education, because people will learn at their own pace.
Yes.
The very structure of saying, at a certain age, you pass exams.
Yes.
So, at 15 you do this, and at 16 you do this, and year 11 you do this.
Yeah.
Actually becomes a little laughable, because actually people are supplementing what they learn and are learning at their own pace, and they get to that knowledge much earlier. And it's an area of expertise. Why shouldn't they be able to be assessed at that level and say, you've got this level of competency, and now you've developed into an advanced level of knowledge.
Yeah.
Instead of this, everybody moves through the system in like the old industrial model. And I think this is where we're starting to see parents taking children out of school into homeschooling and things to actually do exactly that. It's just saying it's about individuals learning at their own pace and actually enabling talents to kind of be developed and passions to be kind of taken under their wing and do things they love.
Yeah.
In addition to what we traditionally think about as schooling.
Yes, and that comes under the universal design learning frame. It's very researched and all that sort of stuff, and that's kind of teaching students at their own pace, their interests, and really designing a lesson plan around a student. But that, I still don't think that works in our traditional model, our assessment-driven framework. It doesn't quite fit.
Yeah.
So how do we actually lean in properly, go fully into a universal design for learning? I think technology is through that.
Well, it's interesting with assessment. For a long time now I've been saying is, in no other place apart from a school system do you tell people to go into a job and saying, we want you to do all of this work, but you have no access to any information.
Yeah.
We want you to know from what you remember, from something you learned before. It doesn't happen anywhere else. Yeah. In every other environment, you're given access to as many tools as you possibly can to do your job. And so the very nature of not having access to the internet in an exam situation, which is exactly what they do the second you step out of that environment, means the assessment is not fit for purpose.
But I also think as well, it's obviously high achiever is very a student. And I remember before I started working, I was like, where am I going to get assessed? Like, how do I know I'm actually doing a good job? And that was so much pressure on somebody who went through a schooling system that was very neoliberal. And then it's taken me years to actually relax into it and allow myself to make mistakes, or lean on my team as well for information, or just be like, guys, I messed up. I got that wrong. And I feel like there's like a breath of fresh air in a workplace compared to a school. So why don't we have that in a school setting? Take that pressure off children, make them excited to learn.
That's
instead of fearful.
Point. Yeah, and certainly in a workplace today, I mean, that encouragement and the not judgment if you make mistakes.
Yeah.
The encouragement of actually sometimes taking risks is far more prevalent now, and certainly not in the school system.
No. Yeah.
So it is a really good point you're making, and I think overall, for me, when we think about the new era of digital education, it's not about so much the digital education, it's education fit for purpose.
Yes.
And fit for our time, and the time will continue to change and evolve. And so what does education look like today needs to catch up
Yeah.
which is a big catch up. But then we need to constantly evolve that as well over the next 5 or 10 years and right into the future.
Yeah.
And who knows what in the future children will look like, the next generation will be doing, and how they'll learn. It will change significantly. I think the thing is we need the conversation. We need it at a country level to make sure that we're not losing sight that the world is shifting right in front of us, and our kids will be the ones who are disadvantaged if we don't start really facing into the fact that it's no longer what we learned or how we learnt in the past.
Exactly.
Hey Alison, look, we could sit here all day and talk.
I know.
And there's so much to be said, but if you're out there right now and this is a good topic to get into a conversation around the water cooler about, particularly if you've got kids. Education is right now under pressure, and we look forward to the conversations that emerge from Tech Week, and I'm sure many people will have this conversation high on their agenda.
Exactly, yes.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Francis.